Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight to the Lower Columbia chapter and the Tualatin Heritage Center meeting for tonight. Tonight, I'm happy to have Clark Neuendorf, and he is going to be speaking about Iron Mountain. And Clark is a retired geologist. He 38 years of varied geologic experience, starting as a mine geologist in the former Ozark Lead Company in southeast Missouri, including work in the Kentucky, Tennessee oil fields, in environmental regulatory and consulting, and 10 years with the South Carolina Geological Survey. He retired in 2018 after 19 years with the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, which some of you will recognize as DOGAMI. So we'd like now to introduce Clark Neuendorf.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for sharing your evening with me. I hope I have an interesting program for you. I think I'll share my screen now. And if we get this to work correctly. We should have, come on, presentation. Is that right? There we go. Okay, well, I'm going to talk about the first iron smelting operation in the Pacific Coast, and that's at Lake Oswego. And I'm going to use a term called charcoal pig iron. And you'll understand why I mention that when I get through the talk. What you're looking at, and I think everybody has been there, to George Rogers Park in Lake Oswego, and that's the restored remnants of the first iron furnace there. And you can see the beautiful stonework, and that stone was, matter of fact, quarried nearby in one of the quarries. It's basalt. And this furnace happens to be a kind of a modeled after a existing furnace in Connecticut, Lime Rock, and it was Byram Richardson's company had this furnace. So that's kind of a little intro. Now, what I like to do is kind of give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk a little bit about the furnaces. This presentation isn't necessarily about each and every furnace and how they smelted the iron. We're going to then kind of switch to charcoal. You may not be aware of some of the charcoal artifacts or some of the remnants of the charcoal industry that was in Lake Oswego. Then I'm going to jump to the overview of the geology because it's important, and it's the reason why we had an iron industry there in Lake Oswego. And do you know that there are mine features there in Iron Mountain? I bet you, if anybody's walked the Iron Mountain Trail, they've never noticed them. So I'm going to talk about that as we go through here. I would like to really acknowledge Susanna Coe, the local historian. She has helped me quite a bit in kind of unraveling what was going on here. And she's kind of kept me in my lane on some of my ideas. So thank you, Susanna. I'm going to start. So here we go. We have an old 1852 cadastral land survey map. So in 1852, we weren't a state yet, or Oregon wasn't a state. That happened in 1859. But we were part of the Oregon Territory. And this was not after or about the time of the land grants. And this map may be a reflection of that process there. So we see Sucker Lake, which you know is the old name for Lake Oswego, or the Lake Oswego, or the Lake of Oswego. And then we have Oswego, which was a town or hamlet over here at the confluence of Sucker Creek and the Willamette River. As you can see, my cursor, if I can get it to come back, is right there. And then you can see the various roads, the old oxen roads and some of the other features that are out here. So Sucker Lake was in place, and it's an artificial lake by 1852. I presume it probably was and there's historians there that can tell it has quite a history of itself. Yeah, and so here we go. Let's get a little bit closer in here. So I'm going to, give you a couple slides about the first furnace. And then, there's a second one about 2 miles north of there. It also was associated with a pipe foundry that is even a little farther north, but I'm going to go to talk about Triron Creek and its charcoal areas up and through here. And then we're going to take a brief journey 2 miles kind of to the southwest and talk about the Patton Mine. And then we're going to go another 2.5 miles to the west, and we're going to talk about the other producing mine there. It's the Purser. I call it the Purser mine, but my wife calls it the Prosser mine. So I'll use that as we go along. So here's the first Oregon Iron Company, and it started in 1865, and really the years of production were 1867 to 1876. It had a intermittent history of production of iron ore, and you can see it's a picture of it in here. You can see where I've got it circled as its term is called the first furnace, and you can see the furnace is where my cursor is. Casting house is down below. Adjacent to that is the Willamette River. The building is up here on the to the left, and if you look at the kiosk, you can see that even more buildings are the sheds for the iron ore, limestone, and the charcoal. Those three elements, those are the formula that were used to make the pig ore, the pig iron. So here's what's called it's still the first furnace, but it changed iron companies, and it was called the Oswego Iron Company. Again, it had a very intermittent production history, but a lot of changes occurred during this time, and they were especially noteworthy along Iron Mountain, and we'll talk about that as we go through the talk. So this furnace was the reason why this is significant. This furnace was enlarged. It was enlarged from 10 tons, which was its previous production. That's 10 tons of iron ore up to 20 tons. So the capacity of the furnace was doubled. And this is a good gives you a good shot of all the warehouses or the sheds that were used to store the different items, charcoal, the limestone, and the iron ore. So there was let's see, we need to say that the Lake Oswego Iron Company just kind of ceased operations in 1885. The Oregon Iron and Steel Company was then organized, and it was organized a couple of years later in 1883 or 85. Its operation was 1888 to 1894. Its I guess glory years or golden year was 1890. But what you see here are two different views of the furnace. Its its capacity went to 50 tons per day. And that's what to produce. That's iron ore. And what do we see here is the casting house. I failed to mention that, but they were usually in front. And the blast furnaces, the hot stoves, the engine house. And you can see the side view here. Again, up here on the corner here is the location map for this. This operation was terminated or ended for a number of reasons. It was the 1894 or the recession that occurred there. They had dwindling ore reserves, and the price or the competition from foreign steel was just too much for them to endure and keep going. The cross sections of what I've got is two two views of the furnaces themselves. And this is all I'm going to talk about. Is one on the left is a cross section of the first furnace. And then the second photograph on the run on the right is the second furnace. And you can see the basically, I think you can get a sense of the scale here. Basically, they have use the same concepts to smelt the iron. I did get a hold of a kind of a formula. There was 2 tons of iron ore, 1 ton of charcoal fuel, and a half ton of limestone, and then of course 5 tons of air. Can you imagine this guy here? The working conditions for the guy charging the furnace from the top, and then the founder down here. What a horrible, hellish job this must have been. And you can see the people here. By the way, this is the way they call it the pig iron. This is the trough, and these are where the iron ore flowed off the trough. And this is kind of like if you make an analogy of a pig. So there is where all the piglets are feeding off the trough, and that's why it's called pig iron. So let's now kind of change our focus and look at the charcoal. Charcoal was extremely important. You had to have enough charcoal to make this all sustainable. And eventually, the Oregon Iron and Steel Company had over 27,000 acres available for just that, for charcoal production. Now there was a division of labor here. Chinese cut the trees down, and then the Europeans were the colliers and the teamsters. And you can see a scene of a teamsters here, a charcoal wagon going off to or being delivered at the first furnace, and a kind of a replica or a photograph from another place of what the mounds or the charcoal mounds would have looked like. This photograph is of it's a LiDAR. It's a perspective LiDAR. It's up here on Triron Creek, right in through here, probably right dead on the middle of this circle here. What I've got in this round or red circle here are some pits. And those are actually the pits that have been preserved in the ground. And we can see that with LiDAR. And this is a LiDAR view. The Triron Creek, is right here. Here's the road that goes up through off of Highway 43 that's right here. And this is Lake Oswego down here. You can find pits all along where there's where it's forests have been preserved, particularly in these gullies. And you can see them to the west. Now, look, can you imagine cutting down 2 acres, clearing 2 acres a week for cutting down, just knocking down trees, clear cutting? And then you get a sense of how much wood is produced. So Douglas fir out here was the preferred tree species, and it was well noted in the old literature that it could produce 100 cords of wood for 1 acre. And then 1 cord of wood made about 50 bushels of charcoal. This was by far the most expensive endeavor that all of the iron companies had to undergo, and it was the most labor intensive as well. This is another photo. There is kind of shows you by 1888 or 1885, they switched from I guess the artisanal type of collier to a more centralized and controlled charcoal production. So there was a number of beehives that were built next to the second furnace. You can see several maps. So the map up on top shows you the beehive furnaces right here. There's about 42 of them. There's where my cursor is right now. That is the furnace, the second furnace. And out here was the foundry, which I won't talk about in this presentation, but that was part of the Oregon Steel or Iron and Steel Company's holdings. It kind of lived on beyond 1884, another 28 years or so before it finally ceased to operate. So Down below is a kind of a view that is looking at the Willamette River where I have my cursor, and you can see that the elaborate, how elaborate the construction was by that company, trestles to deliver the ore and so forth. All of this was done by rail. And then this is another view that kind of shows you the lines of hives with the Willamette River in the background. And I'll end this up by saying that this site continued to be an industrial site long after the furnaces stopped and the pipe foundry stopped production. In fact, they kind of overlap a little bit. This photo is in 1927. Some of the literature I've read says that the furnace was starting to be dismantled by 1926, but you can see that this is the Oregon Portland Cement Company, and its initial how it was looked in as it was first built. The photograph to the right is taken just before the cement company closed in 1981. And by the way, limestone for this plant was produced in Polk County and also in Baker County in lime. Quite a history there. So now let's start to take a look and kind of wander away from George Rogers Park and Ruhr Park and Foothills Park, where by the way, which is all now, you can go and look at some of the historical remains of, well, you can walk around and see where these places were. And go over to the latest park, I think, the newest park in Lake Oswego, and that's the Iron Mountain Park. It's along Iron Mountain Boulevard. It's north of Lake Oswego. Remember, this is Sucker Lake. And there's plenty of parking there, which is a problem because parking on the Iron Mountain Park right here at this was kind of frowned upon. And there was only 2 or 3 parking spots where my cursor is that you could park and walk the trail if you wanted to. Now it's pretty nice. It's pretty accessible. So here's where the mines are located, Patton to the south, and the ones we're going to talk about the most here is here down the north on Iron Mountain. So let's start with the Patton mine. Patton mine's about 2 miles to the southwest. You can see that on the LiDAR map, and this is a typical one. They didn't put in 3D perspective. The iron companies right here, where they would take the iron ore by wagon. They strip mined this. By that I mean they just mine the surface, and they kind of from what I can gather from the literature, only did maybe 3 to 6 acres at the most. And I think we see that if we take a look at a 1956 aerial, and within the yellow box, I have you can see the mounds through here and the steep side of the hill. I think this is the area where I've got my cursor kind of wandering around, is the extent of the pits. Now this is on a Kilkenny Road at the end of it, and right now it's a nice subdivision, and there's not even any yard rocks that show any iron in them. Just to let you know that. Okay, now that's all I can really tell you about the Patton mine. There's really not a lot to see there. But now let's go to Iron Mountain Park, and let's kind of start with a modern aerial photograph. But this is a perspective. This is a 3C perspective. It's kind of like what you see on a Google map, and get you oriented. So this is the Hunt Club down here, over here on the left side, the Iron Mountain Boulevard here. This is this subdivisioning here that we can talk about to the south. And we have the Glen Eagle Road up here, which is the access point to the upper part of the trail. So my point here is, look how many trees there are. All of this area is pretty well heavily forested. It's an urban forest. Well, if we change the view and we overlay the 1956 aerial, and we've got the Hunt Club here, Iron Mountain Park there, we've got the boulevard and the railroad tracks. And if you've been down there, you know what I'm talking about. Now, we don't see hardly any trees there. A few clusters here and there. We do see these trails. I'll point that out, and we'll note those as we go along the dock. That is the old road that was used to get to the mines from the smelter. There's another trail here that goes off the trail and goes down to the Hunt Club. And then I want to point out that here are those old water tanks that you might have heard about. You certainly see the foundations of these tanks as you walk from the top of the Iron Mountain Trail down here. There's two of them. Now, let's put another overlay over the top. This is the 1915 or 14, no, I'm sorry, the 1936 aerial photograph of the area. There's even less trees. There is no water system here. There are no tanks. We still see that there's trail coming off here, although not as well, is coming down here. And again, this is the road and the Iron Mountain Trail that went to the mines. And this is the Hunt Club down here. So what point I'm making out here, or want to tell you, is that I think these photographs demonstrate after the fire of 1904 that was the horrific fire that came through here and just about reached the Oswego, pretty much burned all the trees down to the ground, raised them all. And this is what's kind of was left, a bunch of brush and stuff, and burned everything that was still existing all the way into the mines, and burned the timbers inside the mines that we'll talk about here in a minute. So this was quite a fire. And then all the equipment that was left that was salvageable was then removed and sold for scrap. So let's now talk about, we're going to go now and talk more about the geology. And I think I'll start first by saying that the iron ore that was mined here is called bog ore. And it's a low-grade limonite ore. It's kind of that yellow and red looking ochre material that you can pick up. It has about 30 to 40% iron. Here in these deposits, and the patent mine is the same. There's a tad bit too much phosphorus for it to make steel. And the photograph below is what a typical iron bog would look like. I mean, it'd be pretty messy to get in there. And then the other type of ore was this black, flinty looking silicious stuff. You find that a lot out there at an Iron Mountain. This stuff is soft, highly sought after, and I think it pretty much decomposes pretty rapidly, and that's why you don't see much of it. This ore, what they call this physoid type ore, because there's these round looking pea gravels in here. That's the name that derives its name, or why it's derived its name. Was more extensive on the west end of the deposit. This black century ore was more prevalent on the east part of the deposit. Now the geology is pretty simple. Both mines are located in this kind of it's pink on my screen or a fuchsia, and that is the Columbia River basalts. It's Miocene. The green up here in the corners and this part here are the quaternary boring lavas of the boring volcanic field. The brown is the Missoula flood deposits, and we all have heard the story of the flood deposits that went through and back out of this kind of slot or a canyon or whatever you want to call it through. It left this really, I think you can see it here, is this texture here that is pretty close to what a scab topography would look like. Remember, Sucker Lake, which is this blue area where my cursor is right now, was not there. So all it was here was Sucker Creek that went through here. There are a couple named faults here, the Bolton Fault and the Oatfield Fault. These are all active right now. They either have a strike slip or a normal slip on them. And the ore itself is located between two horizons, or between horizons of basalt. It's called the Vantage Horizon. And it's only, the Vantage Horizon is only maybe 100,000 years old, and it's formed between the, within 300,000 years between this Grand Ronde basalt, which underlies the Vantage Horizon, and over what's on top of the Vantage is the Wanapum basalt. You can see here that I put dots in to show you where there are tunnels. Again, this is kind of a 3D perspective of LiDAR showing the geology. This is where the Vantage Horizon was located. I think this shows you a little bit better what I mean by Vantage Horizon. So here's a cross section, and this is of the Prosser mine, and it is at the east end, very east end, and it shows you what the cross section of the geology was, how it was interpreted. You can see that the Vantage Horizon right here, this red, is separating the Sentinel Bluff from the basalt of ginkgo. And it also shows you some of the features of this mine, at the Hoist House in particular, but then we'll talk about that later. But let me point out that this horizon was 2 to 20 feet thick, and it averaged about 5 to 6 feet. So that's what they were mining and how it looked. Now it looks like, or this has been called, this dips down to the north in this case. I think it bottoms out, and what we're seeing is remnant topography of the underlying Sentinel Bluff basalt. Oh, we want to go the other way. So finally, here we go. We're going to look now where of all the tunnels were located on Iron Mountain. And what I've shown here is another LiDAR map. It's a 3D perspective. Let me get you oriented. Here's the Hunt Club down there, and here's Iron Mountain right here. This is the top of the hill. This is the road that we saw, and I will explain what I mean by that as we go along here. Also had another use. And here's that trail that went down to the Hunt Club. We can see it pretty distinctly here. So I have numbered the adits, or I call them adits. They're called drifts, and they're called tunnels. So we can use all three of those to name them. The first one that was put in the ground was 1867, and I've called that number 1. It was followed by the old tunnel or adit. It was constructed in 1879 and so forth, and you can see double and the new tunnel. So those are the 4 tunnels that are mentioned in the literature. Again, I will refer to them as their names when they were either when the tunnels were started, or by by their names, or their names, their number, and the year they were started. Now these blue circles, I think, are additional tunnels that no one ever talked about, and I can see evidence on the LiDAR for it, and so that's why I've put these here. So in this area, production started as early as 1867, and that was the same time as the Patton mine started. But this mine here provided the bulk of the ore for the smelters, for the furnaces, and about 3/4 of that amount. And we are kind of very lucky here. There is a wealth of information about the mines here that's been saved. In a lot of cases, when you're doing this kind of research, you don't find this kind of mapping. So here's a map. It was done by the Oswego iron mine, and it was done at the time that the ownership switched the Oregon Iron and Steel Company. It shows you the abandoned adit, or the 1867, which is the old mine, and they called it the new mine here, which was the 1879 adit. I will say that the way they mined it is they went in the hill and they drove one tunnel as far as back as they could. And I think ventilation was their issue. They had to stop. This tunnel went 1,000 feet, but it doesn't show it here. And the rest of the tunnels were 600 or a little bit less. So they backed up from the end of the tunnel and they started to go at 45-degree angles off, and they would drift, is what they call it. And they'd make another tunnel and they'd step back, step back, step back. And that's the pattern you see here. And then they would connect these different tunnels. So this was called a rooms and pillar, and these were extremely long pillars on either side. So that's kind of how they approached the mining of the ground here. This map is a different one, and it was drawn by the Oregon Iron and Steel Company in 1893. And this is kind of a year before, if you remember right, year before they closed or ceased operation. And it shows you the extent of the workings, and it goes from about 1,700 feet from this end, west end, to the east end, and from the south end to the right about in here is about 1,000 feet. And you can see that this demonstrates how long they drifted or tunneled on this 1879 adit. This is all ground in here. This map has a wealth of information that I don't have time to talk about. But if you're doing a study of this, wow, there's some great stuff to talk about. So let's put a human face on all this mining. So this picture shows you men that were at the mine. I think this picture wasn't taken at the very end of the mine. I think it was taken at what was called the double mine. And it shows you miners, and I think it shows you somebody, this guy I think is the blacksmith, and this might have worked on top inside the mill, inside the hoist house. And here's the superintendent. He's kind of half dirty. And this guy probably worked in the mill, but all these other guys, and the candles kind of give it away too, are dirty. They've been in the muck. So yeah, these are the miners. And so imagine this: you're going to get $1 a carload, and you're going to probably be able to do 3.5 carloads or 3.25 carloads a day. Might get 350. So you know what? That's for a 2-man crew. That's 6 loads a day at 20 tons. 20 tons is about a dump truck and a quarter that they filled up. Man, that's a lot of work. A lot of work. And I wanted to put this map here to show you that when I mentioned that this photograph might have been taken at here, this is where I think it was taken, not at the tunnels that are at the east end of the mine property, and the tunnel here at the westernmost part of the mine. So if you're, 50 to 60 men were in the mine, and this is probably at the height of its mining in the 1890s. So let's go let's go take a field trip. We're at the top of the Iron Mountain Trail, the west side. And as you can see here down at the map, I got the arrow pointing to the adit. This concrete foundation is part of the, remember I mentioned that there were water tanks here, and beyond here, just beyond here is the big circle, if you've been there, and that was one of the foundations for another tank. So what I'm going to show you here is that if we overlay the hoist house here, it gives you a sense of how it might have been way back in the day, back in 1879, when they were mining here. So we had an elevated hoist house on pillars. We had a railroad right here that we will talk about, and we had a where they dumped ore into the ore cars here and took them back to the mine. So this hoist house had a chimney, and it had a boiler in here and other things. So that, I think that kind of helps you get a visualize what that previous map looked like. In fact, that's this one here. So we were standing right here looking at the hoist house. Now we're looking down at it, and you can see that here's the hoist house, here's the bunker where they loaded the ore, here are the train tracks, and this is the boiler and engine house. There was also a carpentry shop here and a blacksmith shop, and I think I know where this one is. I can find that. I want to point out also, and we'll talk about this, there was another wooden track system that they had here that connected the other adits that were, or tunnels that were to the east. So let's go switch. Now this is what the double adit looks like, or the 1888 adit. And you can see there's a hole there, but it's got a concrete cap. And it was in the 80s, I think, is when the city came in here and covered that thing up. And you can see up here on the LiDAR where that where the adit's located. And if we look at the number 4, the 1890 adit, the new tunnel, which is at the very eastern end of it, this is what is left today. There's a hole. I think if somebody took a shovel and worked at it a little bit, they might even gain entry to this one. So that's what it kind of looks like today. So let's kind of take a minute and kind of look at the map from, we're still looking north, and this is perspective, again, view of the Iron Mountain. We're a little bit closer. You can see that have the labels for the adits, tunnels, or the drifts, where I think there are additional drifts or tunnels here. And what I'm going to do now is show you some mine features.
Mining iron ore.
Okay.
So this is what I want to show you. I mentioned these before. There was a wooden track or cable system, and it followed this upper line through here. And then the wagon road that was installed in 1879, and then later on, a year later, the railroad bed that was used to take iron ore from the mines to the furnaces is below it. And remember, we talked about this one, this trail, this road or system here. I do not know when that was built, and it was built after this feature right here. I could say that. So it's kind of a modern feature, I think. I don't think it was here. That's my feeling. So keeping that map in mind, we're going to now talk. So here we're looking at a different view of the 1879 map. This is the hoist house. I'm going to say that's the carpenter shed. This adit here was the old adit, or the 1867, the original one. And so we're going to talk about in this picture, the railroad. It's a 36 gauge railroad. Pretty great, pretty interesting. Not many places in Oregon had a railroad associated with a mine at this time in this time period. I haven't found too much information. I mean, this also shows you a train shed. It shows you this engine here is the same engine as I'm showing up here. It's the number 1, or the WS Lad. It arrived as soon as the railroad was, or just after the railroad was completed. And if you're really a railroad aficionado, it is a 042 because it has 4 drive wheels and a rear 2 axles, but no axle in front. But you can see the ore cars here, and later on, the Oregon Iron and Steel Company ordered another locomotive, and it arrived in 1888. I don't know if this was used at the mines. I know this one was. Okay, so here, I remember I talked about the wooden track or the cable tram. That's the remnants today. It's a nice path. You can walk it, but you have to beat the brush on here, about right here to get to it. So it was driven by a cable, and that cable was either there was either an engine that operated the cable from here, or it was I mean, that's hard to, I think it was here. So that shows you how they moved ore around and other materials at the mine. Again, we're back to this picture. Again, recap. So there's the wooden track, and this is the road with road bed and the railroad bed. And the reason I say that this one was probably later than the mine is because that is the mine waste rock in blue, and there's 3 of them, I think. And the road cuts this trail cuts the waste rock. The gray areas are landslides. And what I want to show you now is that if we go down and we look at the bottom of the waste rock, and that's here at this LiDAR picture, you can see here I've got it circled, has now been exposed, and its toe has been cut by a trail that leads back up to the Iron Mountain Trail, and you can get to it through Iron Mountain Park. And I have the kind of the area. There's a trail, the path goes right to it right here. The photograph below is kind of what the dump material looks like, or waste rock material looks like. And I think probably a lot of this rock has come from the floor of the mine, from the descriptions I've been able to find. So that's what the rocks look like. Now, I want to kind of sum it up with a couple different things as we go along here. So here, you remember we've seen this picture before. So now I've kind of related it to the areas that it represents. The hoist house here, the adit here, the 1867 adit. I think the train shed was here. I would like to think that there was a train turntable in here to turn the engine around, because I think the engine went both ways up the track. The double tunnel had a hoist, had a house here, at least had a tunnel house right here. And here at the latest adit, the one that was put in by the Oregon Iron and Steel Company, this is a mystery. There is this structure is a bunker that fed ore from the mine down to the tracks down here, and you can see the train and the train cars here. But there is another one here that looks like a coal, like a tipple that you would see at coal companies. This has been a mystery that I've been looking at that I haven't quite figured out yet. So one of the photographs that we do have, now remember, these are all drawings because it wasn't quite time for photography yet, and the newspapers, certainly by 1900s, or getting close to 1900s, had a few more pictures in it, black and white, but it was mostly drawings up to this point. So I think we're looking this way. This picture is looking this way. This is the engine, the steam drive engine. It was connected by a bunch of pulleys and stuff to the ore car. I think this structure here might be one poking out here, but this is very confusing drawing for me, and you sit there and stare at it and try to figure out what was going on. But the way they separated the ore here is by hand, and they did that at the other hoist house, and it probably shifted the same way in 2 grades. One was fine as it falls, and that's the quote, and the other one was the more coarse grade. Again, the piezoid, remember that the soft ore was more desirable. The flinty hard ore that was black, it was less desirable, and you see that scattered all over the hillside now. And just to kind of sum it up, we've got 3 different iron companies or smelting companies, and they're listed there. You can see that there was also a cast iron or a pipe foundry, and it was finally ended its operation in 1928. And there was just, there was over 90,000 tons of pig iron. That's pig iron. And that was produced during the 30 years or the 27 years that iron ore was produced here. It was intermittent, but that's extraordinary, really, if you think about it. 30 years of mining that took place in that area. Again, there was the two furnaces. What a major! They had 600 workers throughout the history of the smelters. Charcoal, I think I said there was 27 area. I was in air. It was 24 acres, 1,000 acres of timber. That included Washington. Bulk of it was in Oregon, and they even had holdings up in British Columbia. There was a really railroads. I can't tell you how rare that is for mining in Oregon, to have a railroad servicing a mine that was about 2.5 miles from its from the furnace. 2 town sites, and it was it wasn't quite what I've read. It wasn't quite a company town. It was close, and it had housing for workers, barns, stores, and a cemetery. So it's the only surviving stone furnace in the Rocky Mountains, and it probably was the biggest, I think, in the Pacific Northwest. So I want to thank you all for joining me, and if you have questions, please let me know, and I'll be happy to answer them. I'm going to stop, Sylvia. I'm going to stop sharing screen. And so, again, thanks everybody for sharing your evening with me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Clark. Sure appreciate that. Very fascinating. We do have some questions. So I'm going to bring up the chat here. How was the bog iron formed?
There's bog ore is being formed now in many places. So I think in this case, we had a low area, an area of a floodplain or a basin or both. And we had springs that were lining the edge of the let's just call it a basin for arguments here. And it was getting iron from the rocks, and that was probably from the Sentinel Bluff. And because it was I guess it didn't have the gradient on it, or the fluvial gradient on this wasn't too big. We had bogs that formed. And so through the magic of chemistry, organisms, and a source of iron, we had the iron ore formed. This is not uncommon. In Oregon, there are quite a few places, even on the coast, that we have iron ore bogs. So did that help? This is not a volcanic or igneous source of iron.
Interesting. Another question from the same person. Actually, there's two. I'm going to give you both questions. What was the intended market for the pigs, and where were the locomotives built?
Okay, so the pigs were intended for a wide market. The pig iron was suitable for wrought iron, of course, and it was also had its structural integrity was also suitable for buildings. And at this time we were starting to use pig iron for facades. They're even thinking about using it as framing. So there was the market for this was, of course, had been San Francisco, but that's its intended market. You can also make all sorts of kind of what do I want to call them, pots and pans and other things. And of course, I don't think they ever got to the point where they'd like to have used that the iron ore for the foundry, but that never came about. Now I think we have a locomotive fan here. So Tom, the locomotives were built by the Baldwin and Locomotive Company, and I believe that's Philadelphia, right? And they are one was a 10 ton, That was the W.S. Ladd, the number 1. The number 2 locomotive was built by Baldwin. You know, I mentioned this Baldwin itself. It was a 20 ton. Now the history of the locomotives are pretty sketchy. There is a photograph of the Ladd, the number 1, at the foundry in 1894. And it is a picture that is shared with the Lane County or Lynn County Historical Society, and then there's a Northwest Pacific railroaders that suggested that it was also used by logging companies, and that was quite a common practice. I do not know the fate of the big locomotive or where it went, so that would be interesting to find out.
He says thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so if you want to do just mine geology up there, you can. There's probably a paper or 2 you could write up there if you wanted to. But each one of these little subjects I wrote or talked about is a talk in itself. But I also want to mention that because there's a historical record or mine records that are available for this site, that's really a bonus, because that type of industrial archaeology was usually thrown away as soon as the company folded, or if somebody was kept them as because they worked there, their relatives or something after they passed. That was one of the things that was thrown away. One of the first things. So it's very refreshing to find.
Nice. So we don't have any more questions in the chat. If you do have a question for Clark.
Dawn's got her hand up.
Okay, go for it.
Unmute. You're still muted. There you go.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry I was late. I was dealing with fire engines. My grandparents and great-grandparents had a lot on Lakeview Boulevard, several acres, and there were large boulders on the top of the ground. So it made it only useful for goats to live there. But the Oregon Iron and Steel was on the deeds for everything. Is that where the housing took place? On Lakeview Boulevard, just south of the park and the Lake Oswego.
Was it? Well, so the mountain itself, yeah, they owned that, and they owned everything practically out there. Is their lot is it close to the country club to the east? To the country club entrance to the east?
I think it's more south toward the freeway.
Okay.
They recently found a Ice Age rock from Montana there.
Right. So the floods went through there, and at the park there, you can start to see boulders in some of the spoils that they've left behind, and some of the contouring that they've done. There are some rounded boulders that look like that. Yeah, they're part of the flood deposits. Most of that area, though, is scabland, and it's been scoured out by the floods going in and going into the Tualatin Basin and exiting the basin as the floods receded. The round rocks that were maybe on your lots were a result of that flow. That's possible. What I've seen there on Iron Mountain is that there's a lack of spherical boulders down near the bottom of the hill, or it's not a mountain, it's really a ridge. But most of the boulders down there are squared off and they're not rounded. So yeah.
Thank you.
It sounds like it.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Where on the was the Willamette meteorite on the Oregon iron and steel property? Where was that?
Oh boy.
And also the town of Willamette.
Yeah, what a controversy that thing was. I'm going to beg forgiveness and say that I'll have to look that one up. Maybe, Yvonne, you know where it is?
It's right across from Fields Bridge Park on the Borland Road,
Okay.
Yeah,
next to the Willamette River.
well, near the Tualatin River.
You're right, where
Yeah.
the Tualatin River flows into the Willamette.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. But that, so did that property then go all the way down to the Tualatin River? And for that company? And the
Charles-
village of Willamette?
Charles, I don't know how far south. I didn't go that far into the property deeds and stuff like that.
Right.
There are records for you. You can find that. I'm
Oh,
pretty
sure.
sure.
I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, offhand, I can't tell you.
And then these mines were on the two sides of what is
No.
now Lake Oswego. Iron
Well,
Mountain was on the north side, and the other one was on the south side of the
Right.
of what is now Lake Oswego.
right. So the patent mines on the south side, I kind of failed to mention that both mines share the same geology.
Right.
And they both were mining the Vantage Horizon. One didn't have the thickness or extent of the iron formation as Iron Mountain. The patent didn't. And because of the patent of is it Prosser or Prosser? What is it? Did I pronounce that right? And if I did not do it, I apologize.
It's
But
Prosser.
Prosser. Okay, good. I think I got it. The Prossers had, I think it was cheaper. It also had provided more reserves than the patent did, and it was eventually just superseded what and fulfilled the needs of production, and the patent could never keep up. So that's my take on it.
Right.
It was easy once they at least put the road in. It was easier to get the ore to. It was easy to get the ore to the furnace. Previous though, the early ones had to windlass it up to top of the hill and take some muddy oxen trails to the furnaces. So, I mean, they had a lot of issues, and it not least of which was a ready supply and abundant supply of charcoal. Without that charcoal, they would have never had an industry here. And the Douglas fir forests were just, I guess, tremendous out there then.
All right. Well, yes, Yvonne?
Maybe I could ask, did Oregon Iron and Steel own the Lake Oswego bed,
Yes.
or where
the
it is
bed
now?
The iron ore bed.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, they purchased it from the holdings of the previous companies. So yes. Yes,
Okay.
they took it all over.
So that controversy continues of whether Lake Oswego is privately owned or publicly owned.
I think that's been resolved, hasn't it?
Has it?
I think so. I think it's public's able to have access to the lake now. So
Okay. Well,
Okay.
Clark, thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Fascinating subject, and loved all the maps, and especially the LiDAR. So
Yeah.
thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope that you'll be attending our meeting next month. Good night, everyone.